Welcome to the Rivals Rankings podcast. I'm National Rankings Director Adam Friedman here with National Recruiting Analyst Marshall Levenson. Marshall, the updated 2025 rankings have just been released. The Rivals 250 got a major refresh as well as the offensive and defensive position rankings. Biggest news in your region in the Mid-South there, Marshall, Harlem Berry moving up to number one running back in the country. What can you tell me about the LSU running back commitment and what we've seen from him this offseason?
Well, really, we've seen exactly what we wanted to see. On last season, we can tell the speed, the production on the ground, but then you saw him at OT7 this year, what he was able to do out wide. You can see that he is truly an all-around threat coming out of the backfield. The body type, and again, the production he had, over 2,000 yards last year. He really fits the mold of what you want at a number one running back. And again, with what we saw, what he can do in the passing game, it just adds that extra bump that put him at the number one running back position. And you could argue he's an all-purpose back, but which may be a discussion for the future. But right now, a full package at running back that was able to kind of give him that extra bump to the number one spot.
Yeah, a five-star back out of the Mid-South region. Really a well-rounded back, explosive player who can score from anywhere on the field, whether it's by handoff or via the passing game. He's an outstanding prospect, and I think it's going to be hard to knock him off that number one spot. He did jump five-star Jordan Davidson, who kept hold on to that fifth star. We'll see how his offseason progresses. We're going to see him at least one more time before the season starts, and there's still time for him to continue to hit the right points on his development track there. But Barry, a very special prospect. There was some big movement in the quarterback rankings in the Mid-South region as well. Keelan Russell got a huge bump up the rankings and is now the number one ranked quarterback in the Mid-South region. The SMU commit has been getting a lot of headlines over the last few months. What have you seen from Russell? I know you've seen him at least 3 or 4 times in person now, Marshall. So what's your impression of Russell, and why did he get such a big bump up?
Yeah, just a massive offseason for him. I mean, pretty much everything we've looked for, every event he's been at, Elite 11, OT7, other 7-on-7 tournaments, other various camps. I mean, he's just looked extremely polished. He's extremely accurate, has a great looking frame. I think he's getting up towards 6'3", 6'4" now. Went to a spring practice. He's in control of everything. The arm, and I think another thing that we're going to talk about more in the future is his running ability. This season, a part of an elite track unit at Duncanville, and he really hasn't needed to use his legs for Duncanville in the past, only sparingly. But I think that's another aspect of his game that's just going to continue to see him trend up. And really everything we've kind of asked of him from an industry, he's hit every single point, which is why we saw such a massive rise into the top 50 overall in the country.
Yeah, you mentioned a top 50 prospect now, up 194 spots in the Rivals 250, now ranking number 47 overall. This past season, he's thrown to fantastic playmakers and will again this year, but completed 74% of his passes while throwing for 35 touchdowns and more than 3,000 yards. And you kind of hit on what I wanted to highlight, the athleticism that he has really yet to show on the football field. I think it's going to show up this year. He's part of that outstanding Duncanville track team. He's been reportedly tracking the 48-second mark or so in the 400 meter dash. I think he's a guy who's going to continue to get a lot of attention. We'll see how much longer or if he sticks with that SMU commitment. He's got that Alabama official visit this weekend and a few other ones that he's looking at. So we'll see what happens there. The quarterback rankings in the Mid-South have undergone a little bit of a change. Like we said, Russell, number one now in the region, followed by Deuce Knight, and then Ty Sperry, and then Ty Hawkins, Kamario Taylor, Ty Sperry, and then Adam Schobel. So this ranking, this order of your guys there, Marshall, in the Southeast, how do you see that playing out? Is this the order that you feel most comfortable with now, or do you still see some movement coming up?
I think there's some movement that could go. This is where I feel it's comfortable at right now. Some guys like Keelan have really shown that the polish, the level of consistency. Ty Hawkins was one that I really liked this offseason. TCU commit. We saw almost all of these guys together at Elite 11, so we were able to really get a side-by-side comparison of most of that group. One that I think we could see to trend up even more is Camario Taylor, out of Mississippi State commit. Really live arm. Really good arm talent. Maybe want to see some hone in on the accuracy a little bit, find some touch. And I think with a guy with his arm and his body type, that's something that'll come over time. And right now, I think he's trying to figure it out, being as strong as he is. Kevin Sperry, another one that's polished. We saw him at the Dallas RCS camp. Maybe would like to see him kind of this upcoming season. He's back in Texas now, back at Geyer. So he's going to have some playmakers around him. So a potentially big season from him. And then Adam Schobel was another one that, rose. I think he's well within the Rivals 250 now. And I think he flipped from Baylor to Oklahoma State this offseason. And so he's one that I'm kind of looking at of maybe even a potential riser to move up. So there's a little bit of shuffling that could come out of it, but I'm comfortable with the way they're ranked now. But yeah, it definitely is a position that, there's some guys that could definitely move up even farther. Keelan Russell being a potential 5-star discussion in the future, and guys like Camario Taylor really, really rising up the ranks.
Yeah. Taylor has a really intriguing physical profile, and just want to see him hone in on some of that accuracy, like you mentioned, especially down the field. I know he's got a big arm. Would love to see a little bit more accuracy as he's pushing the ball down the field. And we've been talking a lot about the offensive side of the ball in the Mid-South right now, but switching over to the defensive side, there are some major playmakers that jumped up the rankings as well. First and foremost, Charles Ross, the elite athlete out of Texas. He's an LSU commit, 4.3 40-yard dash, 10.3 100-meter, 6'1 plus, almost 6'2, 205, 210 pounds, elite athlete. His recruitment was a slam dunk for LSU. There was really not a whole lot of drama there. What can you tell us about Ross and just how his skill set will translate to the next level?
You said it, just elite athlete. It's not often you're finding 200-pound plus guys running in the 4.3s and then back it up 10.3 on the track. And he was running with some of the country's best track runners and was, just a hair off or even beat some of them. So when you look at, going to LSU, playing in an SEC defense, that's the modern linebacker at this point. It's guys that are sideline to sideline. He can get after the quarterback. He can come around the edge. He can drop with his speed. He can cover. Which we've seen him do in 7-on-7, playing some of the safety positions. So a versatile athlete. When you run 4.3 and, you weigh that much, they're going to ask you to do a lot. And so he fits that mold well. It's something he's open to and willing to do, moving around the defense. And so, again, slam dunk recruitment for LSU. And he's probably going to be one of those guys that, is probably an early contributor for the Tigers, just given his athletic profile and the skill set that he brings. And he's probably going to weigh 215 to 220 at some point in college, and probably is not going to lose much speed. So he's a special athlete. Yeah,
definitely. Love watching his film. We were an early 4-star rating on him. Yep. I believe it was last fall, and he's only continued to prove us right, and even prove himself to be a little underrated at that point. Now, one of the highest ranked players in the entire country. LSU's getting another standout defensive prospect in Ross. I also wanted to talk about Riley Pettijohn. He moved up the rankings, now number 33 overall, the inside linebacker out of Texas. He's the number 1 inside linebacker in the entire country. What led to his move up the rankings in your eyes, Marshall?
When you see him in person, I don't know if you have yet, but when you see him in person, you're like, that's a college middle linebacker, right? The body type, everything, from his athletic profile, he's quick, he's strong. But when I went and saw him, the number one thing I saw was just the vision and the instincts at the middle linebacker position. And he's played outside linebacker too before, so he can able to get out into the flat and cover guys. And I think that was a big thing for me of him moving up was, he reads everything. He knows what he's doing out there. He can command a defense, which he's done for McKinney already. And it's going to be interesting to see, how he does this year, because McKinney lost quite a few players. Xavier Filsaime last year was on the back end for McKinney, another high-ranked defensive player. So he's going to take on a little bit of a bigger role this year of being a leader and a captain at that inside position. But you're going to see him in all 3 levels. And I think, with the way he looks and his body type and the versatility he has, even at inside backer, it was an easy choice, to see him move up and be the number one inside linebacker right now.
Yeah, and an explosive guy. He sees the field well, does a great job coming downhill, and can really kind of play all over that linebacker core. He's a versatile guy who's, again, going to continue to see a lot of attention. His recruitment's still not totally settled yet. We'll keep an eye on that. Texas is in a good position for him, and on that, let's talk about Lance Jackson, another big riser in the Mid-South. He's committed to Texas, and the defensive end, has had an outstanding offseason. We got to see him at least twice, I think, this offseason. So when you saw Jackson, what really stood out to you?
Well, one, he looks much lighter than he actually is. So when you look at him, he's going to be able to put a lot of weight on. And at that edge rusher position, we saw him at the Under Armour Dallas. He was pretty much unstoppable. I think he got the MVP that day. Has a much more advanced pass rush arsenal, a lot of moves to his game, much more than I anticipated at this point. And, just seeing that alone, it's like, okay, there's something to this kid that I think we had him a little underrated. And moving forward, now that he has a projectable body type at that position where he's going to put on the weight, we can see that he has the hands, the feet. And I mean, that was an easy kind of another one that was easy. Like, okay, yep, this is what it looks like when you come to, projecting at that position. And he was facing some top linemen that day at the Under Armour Dallas camp. So it wasn't, was no easy, or Houston, sorry. It was no easy competition for him, and he dominated it all day. And so it was an easy choice.
Yeah, you mentioned that frame can hold a lot more weight. We've got him listed at 260. Maybe that's a little high, I think, right now, but he's got that frame. He's 6'5", with a wingspan of more than 80 inches. It's pretty impressive to see just how big he is right now. Runs a sub 540 and, shows off some really explosive traits when you just look at him on paper. So I'm really excited to see how he continues to progress going into the fall and certainly his senior season on the field. So, Marshall, thanks so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure to catch all of Marshall's content on rivals.com, and please do give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram. Marshall's always on the road finding more and more prospects, and he does a great job covering the recruiting trail for us in the Mid-South. Thanks so much to Marshall.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
I'm now joined by recruiting analyst John Garcia, national recruiting analyst. But John, your focus really is on the Southeast, and really there were a ton of big movers in your region. One we've got to start with, though, is Javian Hilson, the defensive end that's committed to Florida State. He's now ranked as the top 4-star in the country, and he is a potential 5-star. But what did we see out of Hilson this offseason that helped move his ranking up?
Well, before we got a chance to see him in person, we just got wind of all these great events that he was participating in and, frankly, dominating. So naturally, really wanted to see him at Rivals Camp. He made it down to Miami, and really from the moment he got there, it was like everyone was like, okay, this is one of those guys. So now let's see what he does. He knew it, and he backed it up. He basically called his shot as an MVP and really looked like it. I mean, just 6'4", 6'5", incredibly long and twitchy off the edge. But we were surprised in watching him that he has an array of counter moves already built in. He's more powerful than maybe his 225, 230-pound frame would suggest. And then he's got an array of counter moves beyond that. Very good with his hands, can work inside as well. So he looks like a guy who's going to scream off the edge, and he can certainly win that way. But we also get to see him working inside and using some more technique. So once he actually fills out that lengthy frame, I think sky's the limit for Javian as one of the true premier edge rushers in this class.
Definitely. I was right there with you at that Miami Rivals camp, and it was shocking just how powerful he is when you see him walk in, and he looks so slight in his frame. He's 6'5", so you're still looking up at him, or at least I am. And at 230, he carries it so well. There's a ton of room to fill out his frame still, and it's no wonder teams from all over the country are still pushing for him. Alabama, Tennessee, just to name a few of them. Hilson, like we just mentioned, is a potential 5-star down the road. There are two other ones that I definitely want to hit on with you. One of them was a big riser, and the other we've known about for a long time and has been ranked highly for a long time. That one is Jamie French, a big-time receiver out of, I believe, Jacksonville, former almost a commit, I guess we'll say. He was he's looking at other schools. We'll put it that way. But he's had a great offseason so far and remains a potential 5-star. John, you've seen him a couple of times already this offseason too. What has he improved on in his game over the last really year?
I think his physicality. He's always been a bigger guy. I mean, legitimate 6'2", close to 200 pounds. And he's always had this polish, a very good route runner. He can create separation beyond with his physical gifts. He can actually route up and out leverage a defensive back. But I think with Jamie, he was doing it from almost a basketball frame. And now he's filled out a little bit and he's more competitive, not only at the catch point on those 50-50 balls, but at the top of the route, doing those subtle things that great receivers do to create even more separation when he's ready to make his breaks. We actually did a pro comp series recently at Rivals, and his was the easiest. I thought he was Keenan Allen. I just thought he was big, physical, polished, and just a better athlete than maybe his frame would otherwise suggest. And that's why he's been really, since the beginning of the 25 ranks, he's been right in that 5-star range as one of the premier receivers in a cycle that is going to be known for wide receivers and probably offensive tackles when all is said and done. So he remains right in the thick of it. Really hard to move a guy like that down when we feel like his floor is so strong, yet he continues to add to the bag as well.
Yeah, Jamie French, really impressive every time that I've seen him. Long downfield threat who can really, like you mentioned, route up guys. I mean, he's got great cutting ability, inside, outside. He's got excellent hands, and quarterbacks love throwing the ball to him because he's got those long arms too, that great catching radius. Another receiver out of the state of Florida who is a big riser, and we've been high on him for a long time, I think higher than the rest of the industry, is Vernell Brown III. He was outstanding at the Miami Rivals camp earlier this year, and you've been talking up this guy really, for the last year or two, John. So what have you seen from Vernell lately that helps push him up the rankings even more?
Every cycle, Adam, there's a couple guys who just force our hand. They just make us say, well, dang, every time we see him, he's dominant or near dominant. And that's Vernell Brown this cycle. Look, he's 5'10", not the biggest guy, 180 pounds or so. So in Florida, there's a lot of those body types, but he separates himself as soon as the lights get bright, as soon as the whistle blows and a camp or a competition gets going. And he does it in a variety of ways. He's dynamic and explosive from a natural perspective, but he's really polished on top of that. And I think one trait we don't talk about enough with wide receivers is that length, right? We usually talk about it with bigger bodies because, hey, red zone threat, 50-50 ball, back shoulder. It's very easy to sort of scout that part of him. But Vernell's a smaller guy with great length, so he's actually got a pretty wide catch radius despite not being a 6'2", 6'3" guy. But really, when it comes down to it, this is a guy with legitimate explosiveness and top-end speed combined with that ball skill element that makes every wide receiver a head turner at the highest of levels. And again, at every event, he just forces your hand. He forces you to talk about him with his play. And like you said, came to Miami and won wide receiver MVP amid a very loaded group with a lot of bigger, stronger, better-looking wide receivers, at least before the event got going.
Yeah, he had a focus on winning MVP at our event, and it was, like you said, it was hard to look away, hard not to talk him up. Loved his competitiveness. He is explosive off the line of scrimmage. He is stronger than you'd think, and he really just kind of has an answer for whatever style of defensive back lines up across from him. If they want to play physically with him, he can just kind of slip by them and shove them out of the way if he needs to. If they want to play off coverage and kind of break on the ball when it's thrown or break on him when he makes his cut, he has the quickness to really fake them out. I really like what he brings to the table. He's got great hands too. We saw him make some incredible catches at the Miami Rivals camp and really throughout the offseason. He's just kind of been a human highlight reel. Now, there have been other big risers from your region in the Southeast there. Another receiver, Joshua Moore, I know has really impressed you. T. Harris, a big defensive back who's committed to Clemson. Outstanding speed from him, 4.3 speed we've seen from him. Max Buchanan, an offensive lineman who's just really come into his own. He's become such a much stronger prospect at the point of attack, has great hands and great technique. And I know another one you love is Tarvis Alford, to linebacker. He's really shot up the rankings for us. What are your thoughts on these guys? And there are a few other names that we can bring up as well.
Yeah, with some of them, again, they just did it in front of us. I think Max Buchanan, in particular, a guy who was playing at around 265 last year, had a good junior year, but came to Rivals Miami at 295. And you're like, okay, if he could still move the way he does with the strength he has, this could be something. And he, ran away with the MVP award after a very dominant event down in Miami. Another guy, chip on his shoulder, tough, strong at the point of attack, as you mentioned, great with his leverage and his feet, just sort of the total package as a guard. So he was an easy call to move into that top 10 range at the offensive guard position. And then of the other ones you mentioned, I think Josh Moore could be the most fascinating. He is not the 7-on-7 guy. He's not the camp guy. He's not running track in the offseason or playing basketball. He's just a football player who is a little bit more reserved, and you got to go out and see him. We were able to do that this spring, and he's every bit of 6'3", well over 200 pounds at this point. I think he's at 210 right now, just chiseled. I mean, he looks like, Jeremiah Smith's little brother or something, just not as polished, not as mature in his game to this point, but physically he has that look and feel. And when the lights are on, this is a very competitive kid who has really been productive in Broward County, Florida, against some great teams, even though he's the best player on the field every game, and every defense is zeroed in on him, but he's still able to rack up, 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdown type seasons. And those are some of the Friday night, validators that we look for. But on the hoof and in person this spring, Joshua Moore is a guy that may rise every single time you see him. One, because you don't see him a whole lot, and two, when you do, he is that big, physical, impressive specimen at the position. Again, wide receiver, just loaded in 2025.
Yeah. Here's another one for you too. Travis Smith out of Georgia. He's been a steady riser for us. And, at that Atlanta Rivals camp earlier this year, Eric Winters, the defensive back, outside linebacker, whatever you want him to be, he was an absolute stud. He was a fantastic playmaker in the secondary, did a great job getting his hands on the ball. I think he had 5 or 6 interceptions during the one-on-one session there. He's got a tremendous ceiling. I'm excited to see how he develops over the next, really the rest of the ranking cycle, the next 6 to 8 months. Tramel Jones, the quarterback commit from Florida, has been a steady riser as well. You've talked him up so much during this offseason, just as a really steady performer there. What really stands out, though, about his performance so far and what you've seen him really become better at over the last 6 months or so?
Yeah, so going back to the end of his junior season, increase that production every single year. And he's a guy who got the ball as a freshman up in Jacksonville, which is not an easy feat to accomplish with the type of competition that you face week in, week out. Got better as a sophomore, took it to another level as a junior. But this offseason, really, I think we've seen him go toe-to-toe with some of the guys who are more well-known for their physical prowess, right? Like a Bryce Underwood, a Juju Lewis, guys who have already established themselves as 5-star guys. Yet here's Tramel Jones just throwing with them, ball for ball, route for route, camp for camp, 7-on for 7-on, whatever setting it is. This guy is absorbing the coaching or whatever the directive is, or play calling in 7-on-7, and he's just executing at as high a level or better than a lot of guys still ranked ahead of him. So it's just another one of those, kind of like Vernell Brown. He just forces your hand a little bit because every time you see him, he's on time, he's executing, he's accurate, he's protecting the football. So he's not the biggest, not the twitchiest dual threat type of quarterback out there, but in between the ears, I think few are better in this cycle. And as we, talk about modernizing the rankings as much as we possibly can, that point guard, ball distributor type of quarterback has a ton of value in this day and age. I mean, look, Kirk Cousins is like the richest dude on planet Earth, right? And he's made a whole career out of that. So I think Tramel Jones is somewhat in that light. He's not going to overwhelm you with any one trait, but every other trait comes together quite nicely. And he's sort of hitting his stride at the right time relative to the rest of the cycle or the rest of the class.
That's right. And, one guy, I'm going to get you out of here on this, another big riser. I definitely didn't want to forget him. Isaiah Gibson, defensive end out of Warner Robins, Georgia. Haven't seen a ton of him in person during the offseason here, but he, continues to impress with every bit of information we learn about him. About 6'4" or so, and nearly an 85-inch wingspan. That's massive for a defensive end like him. 240 pounds or so. Clearly still has room to add mass to his frame. An excellent athlete, runs a sub 4.840 at that size. That is elite. And I would, if I were a betting man, which sometimes I am, I would put a few dollars on him continuing to rise up the ranking as we learn more and more about him. So, John, thank you so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure you catch all of John's content on rivals.com, and please give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram at John Garcia_Jr. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by national recruiting analyst and man on the road, Greg Smith, to discuss the biggest moves in the Midwest during this rankings update. Greg, the main one that we need to talk about is quarterback Tavian St. Clair moving up to 5-star status. The Ohio State quarterback commit has lit it up this offseason. We had an inkling that he should have been rated higher earlier in our ranking cycle, but now he lands among the 5 stars. Greg, you saw Tavian at least once, I think twice during this offseason. What have you seen out of the Ohio State commit that made him really rise up the rankings here?
Yeah, for me, it was great he's a kid that it was great to see in person, right? Because you hear about him and you hear about how much he's improved year over year throughout his high school football career, and he has. But to see him in person against other kids in his grade, standing side by side with those guys, he just, first of all, he looks and walks differently than those kids. I always describe it as he walks onto the field and he looks like a quarterback that's going to play like major college football at a place like Ohio State. And so that's a good box that's checked. Then you see him on the football field, and he can make all the throws. Like, he throws the ball with ease. But he also throws it with power, also with accuracy. Different arm angles and arm slots. I think that the thing that has almost become underrated about his game already is his ability to throw on the run. Like, I've been able to see that. I think at the Elite 11 camp, which was one of the couple of times that I saw him, they do a really good drill where they have the guys throw on the run several times, and he does that effortlessly. I think that's something we'll get to see Ryan Day and those guys showcase with all those receivers that he'll have to throw to at Ohio State as well. But Tavian is the real deal, and very, very happy and well-deserved that we made him a 5-star.
Yeah, I've loved his film from the moment I saw it back in the fall. We made him a Rivals 250 prospect early, and he's continued to rise since then. 6'4", pushing 225 or so, and with a big arm. He can really rocket that ball down the field, like his deep ball accuracy towards the sidelines. And as he continues to adjust to the speed of elite defenders, we're going to see more improved passing over the middle. Another couple of Midwest prospects who made noise during this rankings update. Trey McNutt made noise on and off the field, multiple camps and events. And then Nate Marshall, we haven't seen him at all this offseason. Hoping to see him later this offseason, but these two guys, potential 5 stars out of the Midwest. Greg, you've studied these guys for a while now. What have you seen out of both of them that really puts them on the cusp of that elite status?
Yeah, I think starting with McNutt, he's an elite safety prospect, which it's tough, right? Because those guys, the positional value is just not as high in general. But when you have a guy that is so versatile like McNutt is, and that is the level of athlete that he is, he can play safety, he can play some nickel corner for you. Really twitchy kid. He plays both ways in 7-on-7 and has done well in various showcases during 7-on-7. And he's got track speed too that really actually translates to the football field. And so there's a lot to like there about Trey McNutt. And then with Nate Marshall, he's the next guy out of Illinois, out of Chicago, the big defensive lineman, pass rusher that teams are really coveting. We saw Miami dip into Chicago twice last year for their pass rushers that were both 5 stars by the end of the cycle. And I think Nate Marshall is that next guy. Now, he's committed to Michigan, so he's going up north to play his college football, but he's really a freak athlete. He's a guy, like you said, that we just don't see a lot of. And I would love to get a chance to be able to see him in person and really verify that, aim to see him against light competition and how he stacks up, because he's a kid that you hear the word physical freak, and you see that when you put on his film. I think both of his parents were college basketball players, and so he's got good genes as well. Like, he's a kid that Michigan fans should be really, really excited about. And as the more we see him, the more I think he can continue to move up in the ranking.
Yeah, I think so. Marshall has been a guy who I've really loved on film. I'm sure I'm not alone in that, but he's got fantastic measurables, elite athleticism, and pushing 270 from what I've heard is he can really move across that defensive front and be used in a lot of different ways. Whereas McNutt, that versatile back end defender, can play either safety spot. He can come into the box. He can match up with receivers on the outside in the slot, and just really an explosive presence in the secondary. To finish out the Midwest here, the Midwest overview, there are a few guys who were new additions and some mover uppers, we'll call them, in the Rivals 250. Justin Hill, Jake Cook, and Cody Haddad. Hill moves up to 120 in the nation, Cook to 201, and Haddad 182. Greg, you've seen all these guys there. You've studied them for a while now. What stood out to you about these players that pushed them up the rankings?
Yeah, I think with Justin Hill, man, he's a guy that he is a true kind of edge prospect out of Ohio that I think is much more of a, get out wide and rush the passer, especially create havoc on third downs type of player in college. A guy that, many schools are after. I think that Ohio State is kind of the leader in the clubhouse here, but I was really impressed with seeing him. I saw him out in Ohio at I think it's Under Armour camp that he was very, very good at. I thought that he moved better in space than I anticipated, knowing that he was kind of that screamer off the edge. But he's going to definitely kind of make his hay as a pass rusher, and he shows good fundamentals there as well. Jake Cook is a guy that if there's a guy having a better offseason than Jake Cook, you're going to have to show me him because Jake Cook, I think every event that he's been at this offseason, he's won offensive line MVP, including our event, RCS Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago. He's a kid, too, that, he's done things that you want to see from prospects, right? When you see a guy early on in their high school career and there's some question marks for him to kind of work on, he's got to reshape his body a little bit. He has to refine his technique. He went in the lab and really did those things, and he's been dominating competition. He's a Louisville commit. I know that Louisville's really excited to have him. They're going to have to hold on to him. There's going to be a lot of schools that are coming in on him because the secret is now out. And then Cody Haddad is an interesting one as well. And he's got a lot to like about his game. He will definitely strike you in the back end. Like, he is a big hitter. And that's what Ohio State likes about him. They liked it so much that they flipped him from Wisconsin, where he was previously committed. And he's a kid that he doesn't do a lot of talking. He's not really for social media or anything like that. But you pop on that tape, and he's electric on the back end.
Yeah, all three of them Ohio prospects, right? Cook, we love to see the heavy hands now. He's really good with his hands, plays with good leverage, and very strong. And Haddad, the physicality really jumps out when you think about his game. He's rangy, but he will come down and really lay the wood there. And then with Hill, you mentioned it, kind of that pure edge prospect. He can rush the passer off the edge of the defense. 6'3", a little over 200 pounds now, maybe closer to 215 at this point, but really an explosive prospect off the edge. I'm excited to see how he's going to develop over the next few months heading into his senior season. So, Greg, thanks so much for joining me from the road here for the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure you follow Greg on social media. You can get him on Twitter and Instagram at Greg Smith Rivals, I believe it is. And, of course, you can get all of his content on rivals.com. Safe travels, Greg. Appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
I'm now joined by National Recruiting Director Adam Gorney here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Now, Gorney, you're based in the Los Angeles area, so let's start with a few of the big movers on the West Coast. I want to first start with Josiah Sharma, the defensive tackle out of California over there. He's new to the Rivals 250. He's a big-time interior pass rusher who can also really plug those running lanes. What have you seen from him this offseason that helped propel him into the Rivals 250?
Yeah, everybody's going to get to know this kid as Sugar Bear. That's his nickname. That's kind of what he goes by, and it definitely fits. He is massive, like 6'6", 300 pounds, but filled out physically. He's not just a big guy taking up space in the middle. He's tough. He's mean. He gets after it a lot, and he's surprisingly fast. So he had been understandably picking up offers when coaches got on the road in the spring, and then we saw him at the Rivals camp in LA, and he definitely impressed there as well. Certainly not a finished product, certainly can take some coaching, can always get better along the defensive line, but the stuff you can't teach defensive linemen, toughness, meanness, kind of that wherewithal to get after it. He has all of those things. He has talked about wanting to play in the SEC. Oklahoma has been in there. Georgia, Alabama are some of the schools that he's, shooting for the stars for. So he's definitely a legit player, a lot of talent there and a lot of upside.
Cool. Well, two other guys who are new to the Rivals 250 from that West region, wide receiver LaMason Waller coming in at number 217, and outside linebacker Zadrius Rainey Sale coming in at number 227. Both of these guys have had really, really good off seasons. Rainey Sale has generated a lot of headlines being from that Pacific Northwest region, if I remember correctly, and LaMason Waller, a playmaker who's kind of been on the scene for a while, it seems.
Yeah, Waller's been on the scene for a lot of years. He's been to Rivals events for a lot of years. He puts up big numbers. He plays in what's called here the high desert. So he's not seeing like elite competition every single week, but he definitely is doing a lot of special things. And then he played with Hellstar in a 7-on-7 tournament at USA Flag, which was one of the best 7-on-7s this off season out here, and he looked really good. A very physical, filled out wide receiver. He's not going to kill you with speed, but he is going to get you with size. It looked like he was going to commit to Colorado. Then Brett Barlone switched positions, but Colorado is still very much involved. He's a very productive wide receiver, so that's what I like.
Gotcha. And then Rainey Sale seems like a big physical outside linebacker who can really run down those ball carriers and be an asset in pass coverage as well. Yeah.
Yeah, not totally massive, but over the years, I've sort of learned with linebackers that you want guys that can get to the ball and you want length, but you want guys that can get people on the ground. And that's exactly what he does. He's not going to just blow you away with physicality and say, this guy should be in the Rivals 250 just based off that. He runs well. He's physical. He's smart. He gets after it. And he's got a great frame. So a lot of rumors that UCLA might be the leader there. He had been committed to Washington for about a cup of coffee as Kalen DeBoer left there and then took the Alabama job. But Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, UCLA are all in it. I think the Bruins might have a little bit of an edge now after a recent visit.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on him. But there are two other quarterbacks on the West Coast there who did rise up the rankings in a pretty big way. One of them being Madden Iamaleava, the younger brother of Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee. We've known Madden for a while, up 73 spots now to number 78 overall. And then TJ Lateef, the Nebraska commit, enters the Rivals 250 at number 194. Both of these guys are well-known players. We've scouted them a number of times, but what have you seen them develop over the last few months?
Yeah, we'll start with Madden. He's become one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And, it's been unfair because for years we were like, oh, that's Nico's little brother. But he is a special quarterback who makes great decisions, very mature. Nico was always mature, but kind of carried himself with a little bit of a coolness that we all sort of fell in love with. Madden is a little bit more behind the scenes, more of a leader with his team, a little quieter in that sense, but still incredibly talented and certainly learned. We have a guest here, certainly learned from his older brother. TJ Lateef is, war hardened. Like he plays at Orange Lutheran. They get beaten up pretty good by some of the Trinity League teams. But he's stuck it out. He's stayed there. He's decided not to transfer. He's not surrounded by a great offensive line. He's not surrounded by great wide receivers. And we think that's actually going to be a good thing for when he gets to Nebraska because it's going to be, honestly, a similar situation. He's going to have to kind of work from the ground up. That's something that he's looked for in his recruitment, actually, instead of having a ready-made program for him. And he picked Nebraska, so we think that's a really good fit.
Okay, well, those two guys are now obviously in the Rivals 250 and making some big moves there. The quarterback order nationally didn't change a whole lot. Tavian St. Clair moved up to 5-star status. He's one of the top 3 quarterbacks. Julian Lewis, number 1 quarterback, number 1 prospect overall. And then Bryce Underwood, number 3 overall in the nation. And then KJ Lacey and so on from there. A big mover, Keelan Russell, jumped up there into the top 50. How do you see this quarterback race nationally panning out? We've seen all of these guys really multiple times this offseason.
Yeah, I think if anything over the spring, it's gotten tighter at the top. So we were pretty comfortable with Juju Lewis being the number 1 player and the number 1 quarterback. I think Bryce Underwood who, look, he doesn't do many events. He doesn't talk a whole lot. You don't see him a whole lot. And so you don't have a great resume on him. But when he does show up, I mean, the kid looks awesome physically, not totally crazy about his mechanics. It's still a little long, but it gets there. His accuracy is phenomenal. And when you just see him, it looks like a guy walking out for the NFL draft as a number 1 pick. So he will be very much considered for that number 1 spot overall. St. Clair is another one who has really showed up a lot this offseason and impressed us. It's going to take a lot to get over Bryce Underwood and Juju Lewis in this class at quarterback. And then I think that second tier are the KJ Lacey's and Keelan Russells. I'm excited to see Keelan Russell this summer, but I fear I'm going to like him a whole lot because on tape, he looks a lot like Jaden Daniels did in high school. Tall, skinny, and can pop it off of his hand anywhere in the class. Now, if Jaden Daniels is sort of in the running for, the first pick in the NFL draft, and we're mocking Keelan Russell to be a similar player, then we should consider 5-star status. He's committed to SMU right now. That will not have any effect on his ranking. Alabama is trying to flip him. If they do, that won't have any effect on his ranking. So I think it's a very good group at the top. I do think it sort of thins out as you go down. But what once was, absolutely Juju Lewis, I think is the number 1 quarterback in this class, has gotten a little tighter now.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do love Juju Lewis and what he brings to the table. I saw him at the Atlanta Rivals camp, and he's just as solid as ever. He's not going to blow you away with size, but he is not a small quarterback. He's about 6 foot, 6'1". He has a very thick build. He on film, he looks a lot like Bryce Young, but he is much more built than Bryce Young is even now. He looks prepared for the next level physically, even though he did reclass up 1 year. And then we go on to Bryce Underwood. I saw him at the New Jersey Under Armour camp, and you're right. I mean, physically will blow you away. He threw the ball very well in the pouring down rain, all over the field too. Accuracy, touch, mechanics were okay, not great, but certainly not bad. Footwork can certainly improve, as it can with all of these players, but the physical tools are there to not just be the number 1 ranked player in this class, but to be a number 1 overall draft pick. I can say the same thing with Tavian St. Clair. Loved what I've seen from Keelan Russell on film, and the upside is just tremendous there. Another guy who has steadily risen up the rankings. We had him as an early 4-star last fall, as a guy from Pennsylvania who's now committed to Missouri. That's Matt Zollers. Zollers like dollars, not Zollers, as Coach was quick to point out. Matt Zollers has an absolute rocket for an arm. I saw him at that same New Jersey Under Armour camp in the pouring rain. And if the receivers didn't catch the ball, it was going to make a dent in their chest. He was throwing the ball so hard through the rain. Impressive accuracy, short and intermediate, can really get the ball down the field. Excited to watch him progress as the process goes on. Have heard a lot of really good things about how he processes the game and how coaches are so confident in the way that he sees the field and is quick to diagnose defenses. I'm very excited about him. Also on the East Coast, Adam, we talked a lot about some of the other risers from the East Coast. Will Black, the Notre Dame offensive line commit. I got a chance to see him again for the second time this year, and he has made incredible strides since last year. Outstanding size, 6'7", can play close to 300 pounds right now. Quick feet, very, very strong. Excited to see how he just has another dominant senior season. He doesn't play outstanding competition up in the New England Prep School League, but is a very solid, some very solid defensive linemen he goes against there, and he looks like one of those, just prototypical Notre Dame offensive linemen who will end up as a first-round draft pick. I feel like he is already in position to play a lot early in his career, and I'm excited to see what we get from him going into his senior year. You were able to watch some of his film. What was your impressions of just what you saw from Black last season?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think he could potentially move up much higher. And we're not ranking guys off of where they're going to college, but fit is definitely a consideration. And Notre Dame produces these guys, these tall guys that can fill out once they get to college and then be phenomenal run blockers and put a lot of that on tape and pass block and have the NFL experts sort of question that slightly, but still take him in the first round. So he's definitely someone, we've talked about, who's the next Joe Alt, and probably not fair to ask anyone of that or to make that comparison. Owen Strebig is certainly in that conversation, but now after seeing Will Black and especially comparing him against some other offensive tackles that we really, really like in this class, he's a big boy and he has some room to fill out, and he has an athletic build, which we obviously love. So I think all of that kind of comes together when we're thinking about him at the top of the offensive tackle list.
Yeah, Black has a similar frame to Alt, at least from a size perspective, but he's about 20 pounds heavier right now than Alt was when he enrolled at Notre Dame. So definitely further along physically from that perspective. But there were two other defensive ends from the East Coast who did, one made a big jump up the rankings and another entered the ranking of the Rivals 250 for the first time. The first being Zahir Mathis, the Ohio State defensive end commit out of Philadelphia. We've seen Zahir a bunch over the last few years, and he continues to get bigger, add solid mass to his frame every time we see him. He's quick off the snap. He's got that huge wingspan to impact passing lanes and can really make life difficult for those quarterbacks in the backfield. He's just is a tremendous prospect. And as he continues to learn more about how to properly use his hands and his leverage and his speed and balance, we're going to see him potentially challenge for that 5th star. We might get a chance to see him again this off season before the senior season starts. The other defensive end that we've talked a lot about on rankings calls is Georgia commit Darren Ikenabong out of New Jersey. I got a chance to see him in person for the first time, and a really impressive looking prospect. 6'4", 6'5", really filled out nicely in that 240, 250 range. Has excellent athleticism, has a basketball background, does a good job using his legs to stay low, and has a good center of gravity there. Got to see him for a workout, so it wasn't really much football, coming off the snap and working his hands, things like that. But the physical traits are there, and it looks like Georgia's going to get another impressive defensive line prospect, in Ikenabong. And now, Adam, these two defensive ends, there's a few other guys who could challenge for 5-star status along the defensive front. Javian Hilson is a guy I talked about with John Garcia earlier today about he's a potential 5-star prospect there. Are there any other 5-star potential guys that you see on that front line that really, I guess, you're excited to see later on this offseason potentially?
Yeah, I think there are some. At defensive end, I think the top of the list is Nathaniel Marshall from Illinois, who has the length that you're exactly looking for from a first-round prospect. Now, will he be a perfect football player right now? No, but it doesn't matter. We're looking for traits that the NFL really wants, and then taking shots on these guys. And if you're going to talk about traits, you're going to talk about Isaiah Campbell down in North Carolina as well, because he has a similar build. Now, I do think even going down the list, especially at strong side defensive end, Lance Jackson is a kid that I think we want to see a lot more of, hopefully at national events, because he is basically like a coach's dream in terms of the look physically. And then Marion Dye, the kid from Indiana, is another one who I think is very, very interesting, and we'd like to get to see a lot more. Now, we might not see Dye against national competition until an all-star game, but those are the kind of guys that I think have the most potential. Guys like Elijah Griffin, Justice Terry, they're kind of filled out and done physically, which is perfectly fine. They're dominant. They're great. I wish they would do more national events, especially Griffin. But we're pretty comfortable with them at least being in the 5-star discussion. But there are guys with those elite 5-star traits that I think we want to see more on a football field, and then make that sort of special projection to see if we think that they could be first rounders down the line.
Yeah, I want to throw Isaiah Gibson into this conversation as well.
Yes,
6'4", 80+ inch wingspan, 240 pounds or 250 pounds now. I mean, he's a guy who I could see rising up the rankings even more as we learn more about his current game and where he could end up projecting. Now, we did have another big move in the Rivals 250 that I wanted to touch on before we get out of here, Adam. The race for the number one running back ranking. Jordan Davison was 5-star from early on in the rankings process. He remains a 5-star in this rankings update, but Harlem Berry, the LSU commit, moves up the rankings, is a 5-star prospect, is now the number one running back in the nation. What led to this move in your eyes? Why do you feel so confident in this?
Yeah, but the thing is, Harlem Berry showed up at a bunch of 7-on-7s this offseason and totally dominated. Like, he was not only a running back, we'll have the discussion if he's really an all-purpose back. He can run between the tackles. He can absolutely get outside and make people miss. And he's shown this offseason that he's also an elite pass catcher and playmaker. That's not Jordan Davison. Like, Jordan Davison is elite in his own way, but he's elite like pounding running backs in the NFL are elite. So I've compared him to Ezekiel Elliott. They are the same height and weight. They play very similarly. Like, we saw Elliott in high school and we were like, yeah, he's really good. He does a lot of things that are special, but he doesn't have like tremendously elite speed. He wasn't really catching the ball out of the backfield much. And then he goes on to have a phenomenal NFL career and be a first-round pick. So you look at Davison and you're like, this is very similar styles. Like, he's awesome in tight spaces. He has tremendous vision and patience. He's had it for years. But he also split time over the last 2 years with Nate Frazier and a guy named Ajon Bryant at Mater Dei. So there's a ton of tread left on those tires. And he's looking for a program that's going to fit his style. So he doesn't want to go to complete spread. He basically thinks, Ohio State could be the school for him because of what they did with Elliott and something of a similar offense. And because he's going to be running behind a phenomenal offensive line, and because he's going to have, 4 wide receivers split out who are all NFL guys. That's kind of the level that Jordan Davison is thinking on in terms of his recruitment. Not, I like the facilities or I like the girls there. Like, it's a very professional approach to his recruitment that I like. He's been up to about 220 this offseason. I'd like to see him down in the 210 range now so he can get to Ohio State and that strength and conditioning staff can put some more muscle on him. But he's that kind of build. So it's really just a discussion. And then you have Alvin Henderson in the discussion, someone who ran for astronomical stats last year. He did it in Elba, Alabama against a lot of teams that don't have a lot of Division I players. But when he shows up somewhere, he's still very, very good. So I don't think he's out of the discussion at all yet. I'm not crazy about 3 5-star running backs in a class just because of position value when it comes to the NFL draft. But it's just really a question. Do you want kind of that home run hitter who's exciting in Harlem Berry? LSU has pumped out a ton of running backs. Or do you want kind of that grinder, physical back who's super smart, but is more in between the tackles, maybe more of like an NFL back? That would be Davison. That's the decision we're going to have to make.
Yeah, you know where I stand on this, Adam. I'm more in favor of only having 1 5-star running back than I am more than that. But I can see the traits in both of these guys, Berry and Davison. Davison, I'd love to see, like you mentioned, a little bit lighter, a little bit quicker than he has been this offseason. And, I saw him a little bit this past season, and you can really see the ability is there for a 5-star caliber prospect. And Harlem Berry on film, I mean, really unbelievable burst. I love it when he gets the ball in his hands on a handoff. He can score from anywhere on the field, gets north-south really fast, and plays tougher than his size would indicate. And like you mentioned in the 7-on-7 setting, does a great job catching the ball. In the games, if you want to get him the ball in space, I mean, good luck. Defense is trying to get a hand on him and get him to the ground. It's going to be really difficult. Alvin Henderson, some speed questions there, but tremendously productive, like you mentioned. And there are a few other guys who could maybe push up the rankings later on for running backs, but I'm not sure number one running back would be in the conversation for those guys right now. We'll see how the rest of the offseason plays out. I'm looking at Gideon Davidson, looking at A.K. Deer, Usman Kroma, if we ever get a chance to see him in person. Yeah. But there are some good backs in this class. It's just the position has been devalued by the NFL, and we're lucky if one goes in the first round, let alone 2. And that would kind of point to the number of 5 stars we plan on having at the position. So that does it for this edition of the Rivals Rankings podcast. National Recruiting Director Adam Gorney, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Rankings Director Adam Friedman. Please remember to subscribe to the Rivals.com YouTube channel and follow all of the Rivals.com social media accounts. And of course, you can find all of our content on Rivals.com. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.